I love zombies. And honestly, I am so grateful for their fictional existence. So who here has seen HBO's The Last of Us? Yeah, a lot of you? One of my favorite shows. If you haven't seen it, it's about a fungus that gets in human brains and turns you into a zombie. Terrifying. Luckily, it doesn't exist in humans in real life, but it does exist in ants in the real world. This is based on the very real cordyceps fungus. And so what happens when an ant is infected with cordyceps is it leaves the safety of its own colony and instead goes where the fungus is more comfortable, usually the bottom of a nice warm leaf. And then it's basically an incubator for that fungus, letting that fungus grow bigger and bigger until finally it erupts dramatically outside the abdomen of the ant. So right now, cordyceps is just an ant problem, for now, but there still are deadly fungal diseases that humans are susceptible to. When you think about a disease, what comes to mind? COVID, flu, Ebola, the common cold? All of these are viruses and bacteria. They get all the attention. But fungal disease is on the rise. According to the Lancet Medical Journal, 6.5 million people every single year are affected by invasive fungal disease. This is not just your basic athlete's foot, your yeast infection. These are systemic infections that get into your blood, your brain, or your lungs. And once they're in there, it's really hard to get them out. Back when I was an emergency nurse, I loved to look over the physician's shoulders at x-rays. I wanted to know, how'd you make this decision versus this decision? Looking at that blob, how do you know that that is a fungal infection or a bacterial infection? They tell me, well, there's certain markers here. This one's more dense here. There's some patchiness here. But sometimes we don't know. And because bacterial disease gets more attention and it's thought to be more prevalent, they do antibiotics first and ask questions about fungus later. The problem with that is it leads to a lot of misdiagnoses. And that misdiagnoses leads to delay in treatment, and the delay in treatment can be deadly. So that asks the question, what is a fungus? So when you think about fungus, you might picture what's in your yard, what you buy from the grocery store. But mold is also a fungus, and yeast is a fungus. So bread, cheese, wine, that white stuff on your grapes, that's fungus. And most fungus, they're perfectly harmless. We coexist just fine with them. And they're very necessary for the environment. They help recycle nutrients, making our soil healthy. But occasionally, they become dangerous. And if you're immunocompromised, meaning your immune system is not working the way you should, then you're at increased risk of fungal disease. And that means if you've had cancer, an organ transplant, long-term steroid use, diabetes, or you've been sick a really long time, then you're at increased risk of fungal infection. About 2 years ago, I got a text from my sister. Being the ER nurse that I was, anytime anyone had an infection or some gross picture, they sent it to me and like, what's going on here? Is this infected? Should I go see a doctor? So after months of exhaustion, she showed me her test results and she asked me, what did it mean? As I looked down the page, my heart rate started beating faster and faster because every level that should be high was low. Every level that should be low was high. It was as if you threw a darts at the lab results, just randomly chose. She asked me, what's going on? I told her to go to the ER because I didn't want to be the one to tell my sister she had cancer. After a while in the ER, I finally got the phone call I was expecting but also dreading. She had leukemia. And for those of you who have not experienced cancer, cancer sucks. It takes so much out of you. And so she was one of those that fungal disease was an issue. So one thing they don't tell you when you're going through this is you can't have fresh fruits. You can't have fresh vegetables, no fresh flowers, and no playing in the garden. That's because all of these can bring in dangerous bacterial and fungal spores. Healthy people, we clear them just fine. Our immune system handles it. But if you're immunocompromised like her, that can be the difference of life and death. So one day she wanted a strawberry milkshake. And after chemo, you've been throwing up all day. If you want a strawberry milkshake, that's what you're gonna get. So I drove to Cookout and I ordered her one. But as I was waiting for it, I thought, what if these are fresh strawberries? What if I'm bringing her fresh fruit, the very thing that could kill her? So I asked the worker, I was like, is this fresh? And he's like, well, everything's fresh here. I'm like, at Cookout? And so I made him go ask the manager repeatedly, was there fresh strawberries? And they said, no, it's syrup. Is that okay? I said, yes. I've never been more thankful for high fructose corn syrup in my entire life. So crisis averted, I brought her strawberry milkshake. Unfortunately, she did develop one fungal infection. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and your mouth is just dry? You're unbelievably thirsty and your tongue just feels heavy and furry and gross. Imagine if that happened for 3 weeks solid. That's what happened. Luckily, we caught it early, and with the right medications, it resolved, but she would go on to develop one more fungal infection during the course of her treatment. She is one of those that was a victim of fungal infection because she was immunocompromised. But I'm happy to say today she is healthy and well, cancer-free in the audience, and fungus-free. So I'm very happy to have her here today. So this leads to the question of why aren't antifungals effective in some cases? And that's because fungal cells resemble animal cells. And so a lot of times the medications that would hurt the fungus will also hurt us. They're very unlike bacteria, so you can't use the same strategies you'd use with antibiotics. And to make matters worse, widespread use of antifungals in agriculture has made a lot of them already resistant to the tools that we have in our toolbox. So by the time you get to the hospital, a lot of times you're resistant to the medications already. All right, so now I painted a really grim and disturbing picture of a future of humans riddled with fungal disease. Let's talk about solutions. So my PhD topic is in bioinformatics. Bioinformatics is where biology meets computer science. And what that looks like is we go and we sample yeast and we sequence their genomes. We pull out their DNA and see what's going on. You need computer science for that because genomes are incredibly complex. It's lots of data. Back before computers were as in the forefront, it would take years to sequence a single genome. Now, we can sequence a genome in a couple of days, especially for fungi. So a genome, that's a complete set of instructions for an organism. So most of my work has to do with genomes. So it's your DNA, but it's a complete set of DNA. The first project I want to talk about and how we are fighting the war against fungal disease is by talking about viruses. So I know what you're thinking. Earlier I made a big deal about how viruses got way too much attention. But this is the turducken of viruses. It is a virus in a bacteria, in a fungus that infects plants and humans. So a virus and a bacteria and a fungus and a plant and occasionally humans. And the reason why we care about this is because this fungal pathogen is one of the ones that targets those who are immunocompromised. It loves to settle in the lungs and it's very hard to get rid of. And so by finding these viruses, we can hopefully then find better cures, at least for this fungal pathogen. And so what we did is we computationally identified new viruses in the system. And then we went to the wet lab and we stressed out the bacteria, made it a little too hot, gave it too much sunlight, and then we saw the production of viral-like particles. And what that means is that there's likely viruses there. So we didn't make these viruses, they've always been there. We're just in the process of finding them. And that way, hopefully, that could be a new target for fungal disease treatment. So the other way that we are trying to fight fungal disease is we want to reimagine from the very beginning how to study fungus. So with computers, we can study genomes more efficiently. So wouldn't it be more efficient if we studied more than one fungus at a time? Well, if we studied 5, 10, or 100 fungi, how about 1,154 genomes at a time? And that's what my research lab is doing. The work in my lab with my PhD advisor is we're looking at over 1,000 genomes of fungus to understand the fundamentals of how fungus works, and then later figure out how they're different to find these new targets. We look at how their genome is organized. Where are their genes located? Does that matter? We look at the shapes the DNA and the RNA make and how that can relate to if it can affect you. And then we also look at all the different metrics that make a fungus genome different than our genome. So I know not everyone wants to study fungus day in and day out. I might be a little crazy like that. So what can you do to fight the battle against fungal disease? The first thing you can do is just think about fungus. Change the paradigm that bacteria and viruses are always the culprit. So if you go to the doctor and you just don't seem to be getting better, you get antibiotic after antibiotic, start the conversation. Could it be a fungus? Early intervention can help save lives. So fungus, they've lived well before us, and they'll probably honestly outlive us. So let's prevent the zombie apocalypse together. Think fungus. Thank you.